the holiday season is often filled with joy, warmth, and unforgettable moments with loved ones. But for some, Christmas has also been the backdrop for unexplainable and chilling events. In today's video, you'll hear real stories of supernatural experiences that took place during this magical time of year. Get ready for tales that will send shivers down your spine and might even make you see Christmas lights in a whole new way. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and dive into these eerie stories. Welcome to the darker side of Christmas. My name is Kyle, and last Christmas was one I'll never forget, not because of joy or laughter, but because of something I still can't explain. It all started with a simple gift left at my doorstep. I was spending Christmas alone last year, something I'd planned to do for a while. I live in a small town, and my cozy one-bedroom apartment was decorated just enough to bring some holiday cheer: a modest tree in the corner, a few strings of lights, and a wreath on the front door. On Christmas Eve, as the sun set and the world outside grew quiet, I heard a knock at my door. It wasn't the typical loud knock you'd expect from someone delivering something or a neighbor dropping by. It was soft, deliberate, and oddly unsettling. I opened the door to find no one there, but sitting on the doormat was a small, beautifully wrapped gift box. There was no note, no name, no indication of who it was from. The paper was deep red with golden patterns, and a perfectly tied bow sat on top. Curiosity got the better of me, and I brought the box inside. As I placed it on the kitchen counter, I noticed how cold it felt, as if it had just been taken out of a freezer. I untied the bow, removed the lid, and found a single, vintage-looking ornament inside. It was a glass globe, slightly cloudy, with a faint golden glow. At first, I thought it was a sweet gesture, maybe from a neighbor. But as the night wore on, the gift began to feel more like a curse. I hung the ornament on my Christmas tree, and almost immediately, strange things started happening. The lights on the tree began to flicker, but only around the ornament. Thinking it was just a faulty bulb, I unplugged the lights and decided to leave it until morning. As I settled in to watch a Christmas movie, I felt an overwhelming sense of being watched. It wasn't just paranoia, it was a heavy, suffocating presence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I glanced at the tree and could swear the ornament was glowing brighter than before. The night continued with unease. At around 1 a.m., I woke up to the sound of jingling bells. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, but the sound was real, echoing from my living room. I tiptoed out of bed, heart pounding, and peeked around the corner. The ornament was swinging slightly on the branch, as if someone had just touched it. The jingling sound was gone, but the air felt colder than ever. I convinced myself it was just my imagination, grabbed a blanket, and went back to bed. The next morning, Christmas Day, I woke up to find the ornament sitting on my kitchen counter. I hadn't touched it since hanging it on the tree. My mind raced with explanations. Maybe I'd moved it and forgotten, or perhaps it had fallen off the tree. But the hook was still intact, and there was no way it could have moved on its own. I decided to get rid of it. I wrapped the ornament back in the gift box, drove to the edge of town, and tossed it into a dumpster. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, and I started to feel like the nightmare was over. But that night, as I sat down to relax, I heard another knock at the door. This time, it was louder, more forceful. My stomach dropped as I opened the door to find the same gift box sitting on my doormat. I didn't open it. Instead, I drove straight to the river that ran through town and threw the box into the icy water. I haven't seen the ornament since, but every Christmas since that day, I hear those same soft knocks at my door on Christmas Eve. I've stopped answering. Whatever was in that box, it didn't belong in my world, and I hope it stays gone. Now let's go to the second story. They say Christmas is a time for family and memories, but this past year, I experienced something that felt like stepping into someone else's memories entirely. My name is Chuck, and what happened last December still keeps me awake at night, wondering what I really saw. I live alone in a small house just outside of town. It's not much, but it's cozy, and I've always loved spending Christmas there. Last year, I didn't travel to see family. I'd been swamped with work and decided to enjoy a quiet holiday at home. The evening was uneventful. I had dinner, watched some old Christmas movies, and admired my modestly decorated living room. The fireplace crackled softly, and the only light came from the colorful string of lights on my tree. Around midnight, I decided to call it a night. As I turned off the TV and started heading to bed, I noticed something strange, the faint sound of laughter coming from the living room. It was soft, almost muffled, like it was coming from far away. I froze in place, trying to make sense of it. The sound wasn't coming from outside, it was distinctly within the house. My first thought was that I'd left the TV on, but when I glanced back at the dark screen, I knew that wasn't it. Cautiously, I stepped back into the living room. The laughter had stopped, replaced by a soft hum, like people murmuring in conversation. The room felt different, heavier, as though I'd walked into a space that wasn't mine. Then I saw it. The living room didn't look like mine anymore. The furniture was different, older, mismatched pieces I didn't own. A large, ornate rug I'd never seen before stretched across the floor. The walls were adorned with faded holiday decorations that didn't belong to me. And sitting around the fireplace were shadowy figures. They weren't solid, not exactly. Their forms flickered, like projections from an old film reel. There was a man, a woman, and two children, all dressed in what looked like clothing from the 1950s. They were talking, laughing, and exchanging gifts, completely unaware of my presence. I stood there, paralyzed, watching this ghostly family celebrate their Christmas. The man poured something into a glass for the woman, and the children giggled as they unwrapped presents. It was surreal, like I'd stumbled into a scene from another time. Then the woman looked up. Her gaze locked directly onto mine, and for the first time, I felt like I was the one intruding. Her face didn't look angry or scared, it was blank, expressionless. But her eyes, they seemed to see right through me. The rest of the family stopped what they were doing and turned to look at me too. The air grew cold, and the colorful lights on my tree started to flicker wildly. I took a step back, my heart pounding, and that's when the scene disappeared. In an instant, my living room was back to normal. My furniture, my decorations, it was as if nothing had happened. But the chill in the air remained, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I barely slept that night, and the next morning, I searched for any logical explanation. I thought about calling someone, a friend, a paranormal investigator, anyone, but what could I say? That I'd seen a family from the past celebrating Christmas in my house? Since that night, I've done some digging into the history of the property. It turns out, a family did live here in the 1950s, a man, his wife, and their two children. They moved away after a tragedy, though the records don't specify what happened. I still don't know what I saw that night. Were they spirits, memories of a time long gone, or just my imagination playing tricks on me? All I know is that every Christmas since, I can't sit in my living room without feeling like I'm being watched. Now let's go to the third scary story. And I wish you all a Merry Christmas. Growing up, I always thought snow was magical. But after last Christmas, I'll never look at it the same way again. My name is Milena, and what I experienced during a quiet holiday in a snowy cabin will stay with me forever. Last year, my family decided to rent a cabin for Christmas. It was supposed to be a peaceful getaway, just me, my parents, and my younger brother, Lucas. The cabin was tucked deep into the woods, surrounded by snow-covered trees and hills that looked like they belonged in a holiday postcard. We arrived on Christmas Eve, and everything seemed perfect. The cabin was warm and inviting, with a roaring fireplace and a towering Christmas tree already set up in the living room. Outside, the snow fell steadily, blanketing the ground in white silence. After dinner, we all sat by the fire, exchanging stories and sipping hot chocolate. By the time we went to bed, the world outside was pitch black, with only the occasional howl of wind breaking the stillness. I woke up around 2 a.m. to use the bathroom. As I passed by the living room window, I noticed something strange, a set of footprints in the fresh snow, leading from the woods to our front porch. At first, I thought one of my family members had gone outside for some reason, but the more I looked, the more unsettling it became. The tracks were deep and spaced far apart, as if whoever, or whatever, made them had taken huge strides. I felt a chill creep over me as I realized there were no returning footprints. Whoever had walked up to our cabin hadn't left. Trying not to panic, I quietly checked the front door. It was locked, and everything seemed undisturbed. I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe an animal or a trick of the light, and went back to bed. The next morning, I decided not to mention the footprints. I didn't want to ruin Christmas with my paranoia. But as we sat down for breakfast, my brother suddenly asked, "Did anyone hear singing last night?" We all froze. My dad shook his head, confused, and asked what he meant. Lucas said he'd woken up to the sound of a woman softly singing outside his window. When he looked out, he didn't see anyone, just the snow falling in the dark. That's when I decided to tell them about the footprints. My mom tried to laugh it off, saying it was probably just a deer, but my dad's face turned serious. He decided to check outside. The footprints were still there, but now there were more of them. They circled the cabin, weaving between the trees, and some even stopped directly beneath the windows. The rest of the day was tense. My dad stayed close to the door, keeping an eye out for anything unusual, while my mom tried to keep the mood light with Christmas music and baking. By evening, we were all on edge. As night fell, the snowfall grew heavier, and the wind began to howl. We locked every door and window, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Around midnight, we heard it, faint singing, carried by the wind. It was a soft, melodic hum, almost like a lullaby. My dad grabbed a flashlight and opened the door, but the moment he stepped outside, the singing stopped. He shone the light across the snow, revealing more footprints, now leading away from the cabin, disappearing into the woods. We didn't sleep that night. The singing didn't return, but the eerie silence that followed was almost worse. The next morning, we packed up and left as quickly as we could. To this day, none of us can explain what happened. We've tried to rationalize it, a prank, an animal, maybe even the wind, but deep down, we know it was something else. Whatever it was, it found us in that cabin, and I hope we never cross paths again. Our last story of today. When I think of Christmas, I usually imagine warmth, laughter, and the comfort of being surrounded by family. But last year, Christmas gave me something very different, a memory I wish I could forget. My name is Nathaniel, and what I experienced while volunteering at a church on Christmas Eve still haunts me. I was helping out at an old church in a small, quiet town. The building was beautiful but ancient, with its tall stained glass windows, wooden pews, and a bell tower that creaked with the slightest breeze. The church always hosted a Christmas Eve service followed by a small dinner for the community, and I'd signed up to help set everything up. the evening started like any other. Families arrived, the choir sang carols, and the pastor gave a heartfelt sermon. After the dinner ended and everyone had gone home, a few of us stayed behind to clean up. By the time we finished, it was close to midnight, and I volunteered to lock up the building so the others could leave. The church felt different when it was empty, silent, vast, and almost too still. As I made my way through the sanctuary, turning off the lights, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. When I reached the back of the church, I heard it, a faint rustling sound, like someone moving behind the pews. I froze, listening intently. The sound stopped, and the silence became deafening. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty space. No response. I told myself it was probably just the wind or an animal that had somehow gotten inside. Still, I couldn't shake the unease crawling up my spine. I quickly finished locking the doors and made my way to the bell tower, the last place that needed to be checked. The staircase to the tower was narrow and steep, lit only by a single dim bulb. As I climbed, the air grew colder, and the faint smell of burnt wax filled my nose. When I reached the top, I found the small room empty except for the old bell and some forgotten decorations. I was about to turn around and leave when I noticed something odd, a single lit candle sitting on the windowsill. I hadn't seen it earlier, and no one else had been in the tower all night. My heart pounded as I approached it, the tiny flame flickering in the cold air. That's when I saw the footprints. They were faint but unmistakable, bare footprints in the dust on the wooden floor, leading from the candle to the corner of the room. But there was no one there. A sudden, heavy thud echoed from below, like something had fallen in the sanctuary. I nearly jumped out of my skin and rushed down the stairs. When I reached the bottom, the church was still empty, but the heavy wooden door to the sanctuary was wide open. I'd locked that door myself just minutes ago. Gathering what courage I had left, I stepped inside. The air was freezing, and the only light came from the faint glow of the street lamp outside. The room was empty, or so I thought. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of movement near the altar. My breath caught in my throat as I saw a figure standing there, a woman in a long, dark cloak, her face obscured by shadows. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just stood there, staring in my direction. I bolted out of the church, locking the doors behind me as fast as I could. I didn't stop running until I was back in my car, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the keys. I told the pastor about it the next day, but he just smiled and said, "You're not the first to see her." To this day, I don't know who or what she was. All I know is that I'll never volunteer at that church again. These were some of the most chilling stories that happened during Christmas, remembering that all the accounts were based on real experiences. If these stories made you curious or changed the way you look at Christmas, leave your comment below and share if you've experienced something similar. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell for more stories like these. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.